trying to cover things up. Because this next story, there was a lot of lies told to be able to cover up some, let's say, give someone immunity around some very poor behavior. And I suppose the question I want to pose is, rather than doing something for success, does success allow us immunity? Or should success allow us immunity? Because I know there's plenty of examples that it does, but should it? Should we be immune just because of the success we have or that we create? And the story that I'm going to be talking about is about a gentleman called Roger Ailes, and he was the founder, or was the guy that really founded the Fox News network. And the example of this is actually the mini series that I saw while in Australia. It's on Stan, but it's called The Loudest Voice, starring Russell Crowe. There's some actually really bad ratings of the series. I actually thought it was a really good series, and a really good series because I actually really like watching things. I really like watching real life stories, or kind of mockumentaries, call them, because obviously it's dramatized for TV. But I really like getting into the workings of things and being able to see why and ask the question why. So the mini series goes on this journey of how Roger Ailes launched, with the support of obviously Murdoch. Rudolph Murdoch? No.
Rupert Murdoch.
Of Rupert Murdoch. I've got a little tongue-tied over that. Let me do that again. Of Rupert Murdoch, obviously he funded it and he owned the Fox network. But Roger Ailes came with the idea and kind of really launched and really grew the Fox News network to be the powerhouse, right wing, the first ever right wing focused news outlet, and was heavily involved in many controversies along the way. But eventually, this series goes through all of these things and all these. It's just how it's kind of highlighting how bad of a human this guy was, right? Now, obviously it's dramatized. I don't know the real stories and everything like that. But it goes through all these stories of this sexual abuse and the taking advantage of his position of power and influence and him getting involved in rigging elections and all that kind of stuff and sort of controlling the narrative and there's all these controversies that follow him throughout this drama, and it's just crazy how much bad stuff one human can do but get away with it, right? And we watched the whole series through and my wife ended up turning around to me at the end and going, why is it that he was so successful and yet so bad? And I thought it was a really good question, is why do we, and obviously my answer to that was, unfortunately, we in today's society value success so much that we can kind of ignore people's wrongdoings if it's benefiting us. Obviously, the Fox News network was making billions of dollars, and so this guy's making us lots of money so we can turn a blind eye to it. And obviously at the end, Rupert Murdoch couldn't put up with the controversy so much, so he got rid of him, but he kind of got rid of him and protected him on the way out. And so Dr. Rod, should success provide us immunity for being bad humans, to put it blankly?
Look, I'm sure everyone watching will know the answer. It's no. It's no. But I do understand the dynamics, of course, that when we do gain, a lot of public recognition and so on, and we're clearly influential, particularly in a case like the United States, where someone could even influence election outcomes, it's very easy to use that power for the wrong purposes.
Yeah.
And one of the wrong purposes is to satisfy one's own needs ahead of
Yes.
others.
That's good.
And sometimes that will manifest in sexual harassment or sexual abuse of other people, but it can also manifest in many, many other ways, some of which are quite subtle.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things we need to sort out as leaders, basically before we even lead, is that isn't us.
Yeah.
It's not part of our personal culture.
Yeah.
And our organizations should also ensure that they build into the culture of the organization. No, that is not the way we do things around here.
Yeah.
And look, I know that once someone is making a lot of money for us, it's really difficult to do. And look, doing the right thing doesn't always bring rewards. And when I'm teaching ethics at university, I'll say to my students, listen, the reason why you do the right thing is because it is the right thing to do.
Yes.
And look, researchers try to figure out statistically whether doing the right thing ultimately improves the important bottom line. And there are some studies to show that for example, adopting, say, a CSR approach where you take into account people, planet, as well as profit, that can ultimately, in the long run, lead to higher profits. I think at the end of the day, the jury is out. So I don't think we should rely on some kind of causality that runs from personal morality to the corporate good. And we should have those issues sorted out long before we're in a position where we have power.
Yep.
And as far as corporate culture is concerned, it is something which doesn't really, well, it will bubble up from the bottom, but it won't necessarily be the culture you want. The culture has to come from the top. That's one of the most important roles of the senior management staff. And if you're a public company or a large private company with a board, it has to come from the board. So the chair of the board, the CEO, all of the directors, they have to have a personal culture which aligns with the culture that you want in your organization.
Yeah.
But we see this all the time. It happens in the church world, it happens in the business world, it happens in politics. Whenever people develop a position from which they have significant influence or power, and sometimes it comes from the position itself.
Yeah.
That's what we call positional power. But sometimes it's what we call referent power. It's attached to the individual. So we've just got to get these things sorted out long before we're put in a position where there's a challenge. And look, just in the case of sexual impropriety, organizations need to have a policy that essentially says you don't have males and females on their own together in a small space.
Yeah.
So, as a pastor, I will not meet with a woman, say, in my office. That's especially important because ours is a small church, and most of the time there are not other people around. So if I have someone in my office for a meeting, it's very unlikely that there'll be anybody else around. So if I ever meet with a female, it will either be with my wife or it will be, or another female.
Yeah.
Or it will be in an open public space, like an open cafe.
At a cafe, yeah.
I do that, although some people recommend against that as well, because it could set tongues
Looks
wagging.
like you're out dating.
But so use that very judiciously.
Yeah.
But look, and in terms of things like the culture surrounding parties and so on that are organised for work purposes, you've just got to make sure your culture is sorted well before, and that whenever anybody does even step out of line in a small way, someone needs to say, hey, listen, that's just not the way we do things around here. That's not our culture.
Yeah, we spoke I don't know whether it's last week or the week before, we spoke about our values and how important they are We need you. That's what you're talking about. But on that thing of sexual assault, I going back to that's us leaders trying to satisfy ourselves and trying to pursue our own thing. That's not a servant leader. That's not what God's called. That's not what Jesus gave us as an example. Jesus was an example of a servant leader, not taking advantage of people. If you were there genuinely caring for that person, you know you wouldn't sexually assault them or do anything inappropriate because you actually care about them. And so that's something that it's really important to make that shift is you as a leader, they're not there to serve you. And that's what I suppose could cause a lot of leaders to fall into failure is because they have this, well, you're here to serve my needs. It's actually, no, we're there to serve them and their needs. Also, us as leaders, it's our responsibility to protect them. We have to protect the people we're leading. And we can't be the one that is actually causing, the attack. We need to be defending them. We need to be protecting them as leaders.
That's absolutely right. And look, the other thing I would say is that we probably need to change our thinking on leadership. Nearly every definition of leadership is built around the idea of influence.
Yeah.
But I believe leadership goes way beyond that. Yes, it is influence, but it's about empowerment.
Yeah.
Leaders need to be empowering the people around them.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent, we need to get away from the idea of influence. Look, influence is an outcome of good leadership.
Yeah.
But I believe, firstly, a good leader is someone who will appropriately empower those people around them. And I think the word empowerment must be built in to the definition of leadership.
Yep.
And it's not there. Most of the time, it's not there. If you go to any book on leadership, if you talk to experts on leadership, they will almost always focus on influence.
Yeah.
But I would argue that we need a much, much stronger focus on empowerment. And if, as a leader, my own personal culture is focused on empowerment, there's much less likelihood that I would want to disempower somebody by using them to satisfy my own personal needs.
Yeah, that's good. And empowerment means they're growing. The people around us need to flourish. They need to grow. Because the reason why I emphasize that is I feel like a lot of leaders could use empowerment and I'm empowering them to be able to wash the car better. I'm empowering them to, they may be misinterpreting that empowerment. But what does that empowerment mean? That they're growing. Those people are growing into their purpose, into their calling, into what God has actually called them to, not just empowering them to do your calling as a leader. That's a very good point, Dr. Rob. Also, I kind of want to shift it now to what do we do as leaders if there's someone in our organization that's successful? Should they have immunity, right? And obviously, we know the answer to that is no. I have this conversation with clients all the time, and in recent times, I've actually even had a number of my clients be in a place where I have been telling them for a while that a certain employee is bringing bad culture into their organization. And they're like, oh, but that person performs really well. I couldn't operate my business without that person. And in recent times, they have, for various reasons, those people have vacated their position. And every single time, and not just now, but every single time I've had this conversation with a client, that they're like, but that person's performance. And I'm like, you got to get rid of them because their culture, you don't know how much that's affecting the performance of everything else just because one person performing. I guarantee you, once someone that has a toxic culture is out of your out of your organization will flourish. And in every single one of the situations, and in recent times, perfect example, my clients come back to me and they say, yep, you were right. They've gone and everything is better in the workplace now. And so we as leaders shouldn't allow one of our team's success to make them immune from their bad behavior as well. What are your thoughts on that, of like being able to manage someone's poor behavior, Dr. Rod, that may be performing?
No, you can't afford to, because their culture will end up supplanting the culture that you really want. And look, it goes back right as far as the whole process of selection of staff.
Yep.
You need to satisfy yourself right at the start that there is an alignment of culture. And look, just as a warning, I've done a lot of job interviews in my time, and listen very carefully for the number of times somebody uses the word I, as opposed to using an expression like the team I led or something like that.
Yeah.
Someone who uses that word I very frequently could well be narcissistic, and they will bring their culture into the organization and they will undermine your culture. So you do need to be very, very careful about that. So you need to listen for cues that somebody is actually a leader and not or someone who's more a transformational leader perhaps, or a servant leader, because you don't want a narcissistic leader in your organization.
Yeah.
They'll undermine everybody else. And look, I think in the long run, they'll likely do great damage to your organization.
Mm-hmm. Hey, did you like that video? If so, give us a thumbs up and put a comment below and share your thoughts on the topic. This is an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. And if you'd like to watch the full episode, please click through to check out our channel and consider subscribing, or watch the next video.